Guys, welcome to episode number uno of Nighthawks, and this is a podcast that I've been preparing in collaboration with my friend Sadie. So you're probably, you're familiar with me if you've watched the channel before. My name is Tatiana, hello. And this is my friend Sadie, who, just like me, loves photography and filmmaking, all arts in general. And so that's basically going to be the basis of this podcast, right?
Yeah, we wanted to get together, considering, I may seem like I was a figment of Tat's imagination, brought to life using AI, but I'm not. I usually work in the background of all things TV and video, but through a lot of conversations about the sort of, I guess, weird and outsider side of art, photography, film, all of the above, we thought that maybe we'd get together and have these discussions on video.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully you guys like it.
Yeah, because we used to have actually, we're personal friends and, we used to meet up and just chat about all things. And one day I said, gosh, I wish we could just film this and just put it out. People might enjoy it because we are very interested in a lot of stuff. And you'll see it through this season. And yes, I did say correct, season, because basically the way we're going to structure this podcast is by seasons. So we're going to pick up a sort of tagline or a theme that we're going to explore through a whole season that obviously is going to combine photography, filmmaking, all sorts of things. And then, after a season wraps up, we're going to pick up something else. And we have a lot up our sleeves. And so today's episode actually is going to be about something that we've been discussing for a really long time because we actually are fascinated by this story. Mm-hmm. And that is the story of William Howard Mumler. So, if you're not familiar with William Mumler, he was born in the 1860s, and then I think earlier actually. But
1830.
You have the show notes as well.
Yeah, 1832.
And there you go. So in the 1860s is where our story actually takes place. Mm-hmm. And basically Mumler was, an engraver, I believe. He was doing just other stuff. He basically did work. He worked for this company that dealt with a lot of wealthy clientele.
Yeah.
That dealt with a lot of gold, silver, all sorts of things that at the time were commodities, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
And basically, in this time, he kind of came across photography because photography was somewhat of a novelty back then.
Yeah, still in its infancy. So, as you were saying, he was working at this kind of, I suppose, high-end company, being a professional engraver. It's called Bigelow Brothers and Conrad in Boston. I butchered that. Boston, Massachusetts. So, it was for the elite. People could afford these things. And it was around this time that he started getting interested in photography because more so as a hobby than anything else. And, it was fairly new in its infancy. The daguerreotype by Louis Daguerre. Have I said that right?
Daguerre.
He had invented that, and Mumler took an interest in that. Now, it should be noted that at the time, photographs obviously weren't produced the same way they're produced now.
Exactly, yeah.
And they were produced on a metal plate, I believe. Mm-hmm. And you had to sit for quite a long time. Now you can just snap a million selfies in the space of a minute. I've tried, believe me.
No, yeah. So basically, against this backdrop, which is why we need to give you some sort of context. So photography wasn't really seen as an artistic medium. It was more so seen as something that had a capacity to document reality. So around this time, people used it mainly as a hobby, and people used to photograph landscapes, to document stuff, or take portraits. Portraits were still very, and it wasn't like something that was very highly accessible. And I feel as though photography back there was also a commodity in a way. because only a certain people could afford it. Now, one important thing here as well is that against this sort of, background of photography developing, there was something else kind of bubbling, and that is super important for our story, and that is spiritism or spiritualism. Different things, but they were kind of both within the same sort of, growing sort of path. And basically we have to think that, spiritualism here is the ability, or more so people that believe that you have the capacity, or certain mediums have the capacity to communicate with those that have departed. And you take this and, put it as well against the backdrop of, civil war. A lot of people were, in fact, losing their, husbands, their children, were deeply affected by this. A lot of diseases as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a time when diseases like tuberculosis were rampant, particularly affecting younger people. There was a high mortality rate when it came to children. I mean, you were lucky if you got past, I think if you got past your 5th birthday, generally it was easier to be a bit healthier, but those first few years were almost, it was dangerous. And then of course, as you mentioned, civil war, you're thinking you're losing pretty much an entire generation.
So there was a lot of, like, I'd say, longing for people. And so against this backdrop is where our story today will kind of unfold, because Mumler took an interest in photography, and he wasn't necessarily into anything in particular. He was just photographing, mainly taking self-portraits. And one given afternoon, it took a very interesting, let's put it this way, self-portrait. And basically on that self-portrait, he saw a figure that he believed was his, I believe, dead cousin, right?
Yeah, he believed that what this sort of faded, slightly blurry apparition, I suppose, that was in the image next to him when he developed it, and it looked like that of a young lady, and he believed to him that it looked exactly like his deceased cousin, and he believed that it was in fact possibly her ghost.
Ooh, but we have to come to a halt, because when we were doing research for this, because we weren't just gonna have like proper talk without giving you some sort of backdrop, some sort of information for you guys to understand the context of it all, we kind of figured out 2 different story paths here. So one particular thing that we have to understand about Mumler, even though we don't have a date of birth or anything like that, we don't have a lot of information about his personality, which would be actually very helpful to understand this story.
Wish he had a diary or something.
No, imagine. And then we could go through it and see like his thoughts as he photographed people and stuff. But anyways, he basically never took accountability. And what I mean by this is that, he never wanted to put blame in his own actions, right? So there's going to be a series of events, he's going to always say, yes, but, play innocent, or say, really, that wasn't my, fault kind of way. Someone else said something, or someone else put it out there. So he was very clever in the way he maneuvered around, the actions and the people that would come against him, and etc.
He would have been a great politician.
He would have been a great politician. And so basically, Mumler took this picture, and then according to his version, right, a friend of his that was spiritualist was responsible to share it amongst people in Boston. And this picture ended up being put in newspapers, and of course it was a great novelty. People were like, oh my god, what is this, like, how is he doing this, and etc. But then another version of the story is that actually Mumler took this picture and he thought to himself that this was most likely a mistake that he made, a double exposure, and he just showed it to friends, and the friends again believed that this could be something connected to the spiritualism or the spiritual realm, and then put it out there. In both ways, I feel like, both benefited from this, because I feel like Mumler benefited from the publicity of it all.
Yeah.
To grow a business, I suppose. And then the spiritualists would look at pictures as kind of proof.
That's it. So it's almost like it kind of snowballed very, very quickly.
Yeah.
It should also be noted that Mumler himself was married to a spiritualist medium.
Yeah, that's
so a lady
right.
that believed that she was communicating with ghosts. Now, I guess we'll talk about this more later, but I mean, there's definitely some kind of heavy influence there. I mean, Can you imagine their first date?
Hi, I see ghosts.
I see dead people. I mean, look, everyone has someone. Everyone
I can photograph them for you if you want.
I mean, everyone has the one somewhere. There's someone for everyone.
Sorry for interrupting the episode here, guys and gals. I just wanted to make a very brief mention to MPB. MPB is the sponsor of this podcast, and MPB is the largest online platform where you can buy, sell, or trade your used photography and filmmaking equipment. Now, for this month of March, we have teamed up with MPB and we are offering a exclusive code, and the code is Nighthawks. So if you go to mpb.com and you're selling to MPB during this month of March, you can put on the code Nighthawks and they'll give you a 5% boost on whatever you're selling, on the total value of what you're selling. Now, this code is valid only for first-time customers, and also your transaction needs to be superior to £100. This code is valid through MPB UK, MPB EU, and MPB US. And you can find more information about this in the description of every episode, in whatever platform you're tuning in, and also in the show notes. So if you're curious, check it out. And we would like to thank MPB for giving us a shot here, helping us with this podcast. We really appreciate it. And yeah, without further ado, let's go and continue with the episode.
So, joking aside, this kind of, I guess, took on a more serious tone.
Yeah.
You mentioned, it's a big time of loss. I mean, I suppose compared to nowadays, we're a bit more detached from the whole concept of death. These guys were not like that. And of course, when you've got such a high death rate, particularly among the younger population.
Yeah, I agree.
There were I think a lot of people were yearning to get some kind of evidence or assurance that
Closure.
But that their loved ones weren't just extinguished, but that they were in fact still around, that they could get some comfort from that, and that was kind of how his business took off.
They established a business. I mean, he established himself as, this great reputation. People took interest after seeing that first image, and people came to him for pictures. Can you take a picture with so-and-so, and they'd give him, I think, an accurate description of the person that they had lost, and they were hoping that, they could be photographed with them. And so basically people would come in, sit, and he would kind of put on a plate and make a whole kind of show of it as well. I think he was very much into that, the theatrics of it.
Yeah.
And then take the photo, for which he would actually charge $10.
Yeah, I mean,
it's insane.
Yeah, that's
$10
a lot.
in 1860.
Yeah, it's $196. I mean, look, but at the start of it, you have very little evidence that this isn't real. So people are coming in, and if it was, I guess, a failed ghost photo, he would actually, make apologies why the ghost hadn't shown up. I think that's very fair.
It just didn't feel like it today.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you've died recently and you're in this new world, you're not really going to want to come back straight away. I mean, I have a feeling the other world a bit further, and they're not going to be like, okay, I'll be back straight away for this photo. No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. By our accounts, guys, when we were doing research for this, $196. There's reports that William Mumler took up until 300 to 500 photos during the course of 6 months. So we're talking something on the realms of thousands and thousands of dollars. Like, it's insane. And he would get as well, by the way, basically orders by mail.
Yeah.
So, and people would just describe apparently what their who their person looked like, and then he would kind of mail it back. And I think the payment was like something like $7. He was doing very well.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people, he developed this reputation, and Hannah as well was a very well medium in Boston, in the Boston community. So I feel like people believed her, and they would probably think like she's with him. So
yeah, I mean, it probably added, I guess, a certain level of credibility to what he was doing.
Exactly.
Because she was there. I mean, I think Hannah had been doing the whole medium thing since she was a kid.
Yeah.
So she had gained a good reputation, and then here's this guy who suddenly comes out and he's able to photograph ghosts.
Yeah.
That no one else has done it before. And, you know, at the time, there was no reason why people would think he couldn't do it. No one really had, I guess, the knowledge of how these images have been created.
But
until...
there were some skeptics, though.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I mean, cancel culture has always been there, I feel, in one way or another, okay? I think it's more heightened these days, but there's always been a certain level of skepticism when someone is so successful. And, like, first of all, we're talking about someone who's making thousands. So thousands in today's money could turn into millions. So you would be, like, really extremely wealthy. Nobody knew how he was doing what he was doing, and he kept on just doing more and more and more.
Yeah.
And photographers at the time, actually people that were, you know, either professional or taking it as a hobby, they kind of were like, but how is this guy doing it? So they were kind of questioning it. And obviously they came up to some conclusions, and, you know, there was a lot of skepticism. Now also, guys, I wanted to just make a little note that, you know, spiritualism was so big, like back then, that you had, quote unquote, like, say, celebrities like Arthur Conan Doyle, Mary Todd Lincoln, you know, people like Harry Houdini, who would later turn against it, but still they were, you know, for a time supportive of it. You can't please everyone, so you'll have a wave of people that won't like you. And he had a lot of people that didn't like him.
The grudges.
And then he actually, you know, these people, these photographers would, you know, go into his actual studio, investigate. And one thing that actually, I found this very weird, but like at the same time justifiable, because I probably would do the same. Because if you try to say, no, you can't come in, you can't investigate, then you're telling that something's gone on. So he lets him come in, and he lets him, you know, go to the dark room with him. He lets him just touch his equipment and stuff like that. I think the whole thing is kind of puzzling to me.
He's probably, I think if you want to believe something so much, he probably allowed himself, because there must have been, if he has an inkling of what he's doing is wrong, there may have been an underlying guilt there. So to continue making all this money, he probably repressed all that and said, well, no, this is right, so you can come in. It is what I'm doing.
My vision of it is that he ran with it, and it comes to a point where you just have to roll with it, because rolling with it is the safest. Well, basically both outcomes are bad. Either you say, sure, come in, investigate and whatever, and you're running with the thing that you're innocent, or you're saying that you're don't come in and whatever, and then people are going to grow more and more skeptical. I think he just came, and you will see this with when we further along the story, but I think it's just kind of like the narrowing of it. You just have to run with it. And I think, like, whether he was aware of it or what he was doing and etc., that's another story. But I feel like he just kind of, he had to carry on with the show. And carrying on with the show, you know, people in Boston started growing more and more suspicious. And basically he kind of, the opposition grew so big that he closed shop and moved to New York.
But the interesting thing was that people, you know, were starting to see some of the ghosts from the images on the street.
And sometimes the ghosts in the picture would be wearing like clothes that wouldn't be appropriate for the time that they lived or passed away. So they would be wearing the latest fashion. Let's say fashionable ghosts. I think they might have had like some, you know, pick up some fashion on the other side. But anyways, I think it's interesting that, you know, during this time in New York, this is why we made this kind of bridge that is so important, is because this is gonna lead to very big oppositions and ultimately to a trial. Now, people were very skeptical, and within that, you know, sort of like skepticism, there were some people that didn't have the experience that they had with Mumler wasn't necessarily the best experience. And so basically these were wealthy people, and they decided to complain or put in a word with the New York mayor. And the New York mayor decided to discreetly do something about it, and basically he sent in you know, kind of like someone to inspect Mumler. And this person would pose as a potential customer. Right?
Yeah, so this was a chief marshal of NYC. His name was Joseph H. Tucker, and he was the one that went in, I guess, as a fake client, pretty much. So Tucker sat down for a portrait, like many others that had done before him, and was told when his image was produced that the figure in the image, the ghost, was his deceased father-in-law. And immediately, this wasn't true. Because obviously Tucker knows who in his family is alive and dead.
Yeah, gotcha.
But instead of kind of, I guess, calling Mumler out at the time, he kept quiet, and he just wanted to get a bit more information about Mumler. So took a pamphlet from the business, but decided that instead he would use this as evidence to kind of call Mumler out and get him done for fraud and larceny.
And here we are. I think probably Mumler was like, oh my God, he liked me so much. He even took a pamphlet. Maybe he's going to give me some more
business. God.
Little did he know what about to come.
Did he not think for a second? He was like, this, like, surely.
I think it's what I said. I think it makes sense to me. He just had to run with it because what's the option? Not running with it is basically saying that, yes, I'm a fraud or hinting that you are. So I feel like the only way out of it, or not way out, but kind of carrying on, is just to say, yeah, sure, I'm innocent. This is real. Because obviously, like, this became such a huge deal. Basically, they came, I think, a few days later after Tucker took his portrait and basically arrested Mumler.
Yeah.
And they arrested him for what? For fraud and larceny, I believe?
Yeah, I mean, it landed him in jail for a little bit. However, I mean, although this is often referred to as the trial of Mumler, it wasn't actually a real trial. So, in fact, it was more of a hearing, I suppose. And, you know, there were witnesses brought in. Abraham Bogardus, I really hope I pronounced that right. You can let me know if I haven't. I probably... How is it? How would you pronounce it?
You're asking the worst person. I swear to God, there's so many times where in my YouTube videos people are like, it's not pronounced this way, it's pronounced that way. I just like to make the voices in my head. I know that some people are like, oh, by the way, it's not pronounced this way. And I'm reading their comments like, oh, by the way, it's not pronounced. But there's other people there's like, it's not pronounced that way.
I know, angrily banging away at the keyboard.
To play the various...
Just sitting there full of rage at these like tiny mistakes.
Keyboard warriors.
Yeah.
It's Abraham Bogardus.
All right, I'm just going to refer to him as Abraham because I'm already sensing these comments. So he was a photographer himself. I mean, he had used the daguerreotype, had produced about 200,000 images himself. So he was pretty much an ideal witness, I suppose. And he even produced a fake spirit photograph of his own.
Oh.
So it's kind of just to prove that, look, this is how it's done. I can do it. So what makes you believe that this guy, Mumler, has any credibility whatsoever?
But I read there was a second witness, though, and that one was actually, when I read this, I was like, what? Like, so the second witness is actually P.T. Barnum. And for those of you that are not very much familiar with P.T. Barnum, he was an American sort of politician. He was known actually for owning the Ringling Brothers. I believe this is how you know of it today, the Ringling Brothers Circus. He was the owner, before he was called the Ringling Brothers, he was actually P.T. Barnum's Circle or something like that. And basically he was extremely famous, extremely wealthy, and he himself came in as an expert in fraud.
Yeah,
that's right.
Because hoaxes and tricks.
Hoaxes and tricks. Because he had actually done a few of it himself.
I mean, he was basically going, I'm a liar, so I know that this guy isn't a liar, which is just, I mean, that's going to...
I know, it's really weird.
It's messing with my head a little bit.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, like, this is the thing, P.T. Barnum actually did not know William Mumler. So he never had attended Mumler's studio or anything like that. He just came in because he just knew the man was a fraud. But, I mean, this is just to say that, you know, these were, you know, some of the more star witnesses in what is commonly known as the William Mumler trial, even though it was actually a hearing before a grand jury. A hearing before it goes to a grand jury and it decides if it's taken to trial or not. So it's just that. And people refer to this because really, I feel that it was a trial in a way by the public of, you know, the court of public opinion, I suppose. Yeah. Because there was a lot of news coverage of this. It was a big deal. Like, and I think...
It's like trial by social media today.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it can affect whether something does go to trial as well, because it's not obviously going to be a fair trial when you have different articles or all these things written and said about it, because it'll influence the outcome.
Yeah, I agree. But then again, if you're wondering if he came out guilty or not, the truth is that the case didn't go to trial.
Yeah.
Because the despite the fact that they, had people coming in like the Bogardus guy and saying like, okay, this is how it could possibly be done. And there were a lot of theories about the possible double exposures. The truth is that there was no way the prosecution could prove, in fact, that Mumler was doing how he was doing what he was doing. But I think, though, that we're talking about a case of double exposures.
100%.
I think that's what it is.
Or he hadn't maybe cleaned the plate that he used to create the first image, and that's how he did it. I mean, it was obviously, I think it was probably, obviously the first one was probably an accident. But then going forward, he was like, well, how did I make that mess? And then it's like, my whole theory about how milkshakes were created. I've no idea. I could be wrong, but I always thought that like the ice cream machine had broken. So it was all this melted ice cream. And rather than throw it away and waste it, someone was like, actually, this is this new thing called a milkshake, and was just like really handing out melted milkshakes. But in saying that, I think, the prosecution, like, they couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that these images were fake, even though they could recreate fake images. They couldn't prove that the ghost images were fake. So it didn't go to trial. However, I think even, just the hype surrounding this, surrounding this fraud is enough to mess up someone's reputation. And it kind of did.
He still had people coming in, but I think I think he ended up going back to Boston, I believe.
He did, yeah.
But like, he still had some clientele, but not really the numbers, I'd say, that...
No, I mean, it was still after this that Mrs. Mary Todd Lincoln posed. So I guess that was him, like, trying to,
she still believed him after all of this.
But this poor woman is still grieving. So,
true.
If you want to believe something enough, you will. It's a very famous image of her with the spirit of her deceased husband, Abraham Lincoln. Definitely a vulnerable woman who lost her husband in horrific, very sudden circumstances. As we all know. But yeah, although he had, this kind of celebrity moment, I don't think it was going to do anything to kind of revive his career to the peak that it was at before. So Mumler, he went back to Boston. He was still taking photographs. He'd set up a new studio in his mother-in-law's house, and that's kind of where he kind of went into a little bit of obscurity after that. I guess probably just wanted to fade away. I'd be mortified personally. I probably would let myself fade away instead of trying to regain the level of popularity. I mean, he'd been absolutely cancelled.
I'd do something dramatic. I feel as though like I threw myself off a bridge or something. And I'm not saying this because like I think like if you ended like in a dramatic note, then people will be like always wondering what it is that you were.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this because I feel like I personally would be destroyed. So I'd be like contemplating like, okay, I'm going to do something crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that was a bit of a leap though. I mean,
sorry.
Like going from, I might fade away into obscurity a little bit. I don't know, do a bit of gardening, maybe volunteer, throw myself off a bridge. I mean, that went from 1 to 100 very quickly.
I know. Oh, sorry guys. But I
You're
feel
full of surprises, aren't you?
I am full of surprises. I mean, it's like that time I said I would like to go to the moon.
Yeah. I mean, look, we can work on that, but...
Yeah, maybe in another episode we can discuss this a bit more further. But yeah, I am a bit of a, say, eccentric character sometimes.
Yeah, you would have gotten along with Mumler, because like they're almost like the original Goths, the people around this time.
I know, it's a dinner party. It'd be like, yeah, sure. He'd be one of the people I'd want in my dinner party. I'd love to ask him, like, how was it?
Yeah, I would ask him if he's okay, because like there's just a lot going on there. Now he did actually go on to write his own his autobiography to give his side of the story, but I believe it didn't. I mean, he wasn't really taking responsibility for anything. I think it was still very much, oh well, I never said anything. If people wanted to believe it, they believed what they wanted,
exactly.
And they're going to give me money. I got to eat. So he's going to take it.
I actually think you pointed out something very good there, because I feel as though when we look at these pictures, we have to realize that the ones that we're seeing right now, there are actually enlargements, but these pictures are quite small. And I think it is the case of people saw certain features. There wasn't a lot of detail, there wasn't anything like that, and in fact sometimes the ghosts were kind of blurry and whatever. And I feel as though like it's kind of playing on the willingness of people to believe.
So
I think that's what it is. It's a combination of possible double exposures. Okay, I'll say double exposures, and the willingness of people that are grieving.
Yeah. Look, he did release his autobiography, 1875. I mean, you don't hear much. You don't hear much of him after that. And he passes away in 1884, quite young, in his 50s. So, you know, if there's any photographers out there, let's see if we can get Mumler in a photo, and we can, you know, ask him, like, let's do a proper interview of him.
If you had a dinner with an impossible dinner with all these people, I think Mumler would be. Who would you want to be on your dinner?
In my fantasy dinner party?
Yeah.
Oh God, you see, the interesting thing is, because there's so many people I admire throughout history, but I just know they would be an absolute wreck the head at a party. Interesting personalities that might not lend themselves to a nice dinner party. I mean, I love Vincent van Gogh.
Okay.
But I don't know if I'd want him at a party, because I have a feeling it might get a bit chaotic. Love his work. Very interested in him as a person. But who would you have?
I don't know.
Amelia Earhart's on mine as well.
Oh yeah.
Because what the hell happened to her?
Yeah.
I just want the details, the gory details.
I think we should base it around that. I think we should ask like people that are connected to great mysteries. So we could actually learn about it. But then again, if we learned about it, like, there's no way people will believe us.
Yeah.
So from now, like, you know, we've talked about William Mumler. I think that's a wrap up of the story, at least from what we could find. You know, I'm going to be leaving as well links in the description to kind of like the show notes and other possible things that if you're interested, you might just want to have a look. But yeah, I think we have quite of an interesting episode number 2 to come up, which will be, Sarah, would you like to give people just a little bit of a glimpse?
I like that you did that, because it kind of leads on to, you know, the sort of strange, mysterious, and a little bit, I suppose, I don't want to use the word creepy, but fascinating, I think, is a good word for what we're going to do next. But we are going to be talking a little bit about the world of Victorian post-mortem photography. That's just a little snippet of it. And we're going
to be talking as well of how photography as accompanied the concept of, you know, someone's passing and kind of how that has changed over time.
Yeah. But I suppose as we're coming close to the end of this episode, I thought I'd drop in a couple of facts. Because it is very interesting. I mean, we're talking about the whole notion of what do you believe? Why do you believe it? How, I suppose, easily you're going to be swayed into believing something, particularly when it comes to death, spiritualism, ghosts, all of the above. A survey was done. Now we'll include that in the show notes if you want to follow it. In 2021, but for people above the age of 21. That's handy, isn't it? 21. And over 63% of them in America believed in the paranormal in some form.
Ooh.
Now, I don't know who's doing these surveys in terms of like who's following them, but like I presume it's a broad spectrum and we will look through it. But 63%, I mean, that's a lot.
That's a lot. I mean, I suppose, you know, there's got to be something out there for a lot of people to believe in. I think in this case, Mumler, I wouldn't be necessarily inclined to believe, but hey, each to their own. I mean, you live your truth.
You do you. What's your kind of, I guess, final thought on Mumler, and how do you feel about our friend?
Well, I respect, like, you know, his work and everything. You know, I'm not gonna be bashing on anyone publicly, and it's not my style. But I do think that I get a bit iffy because I feel that there's a degree of taking advantage of people that are grieving. Now, for instance, when I talked about P.T. Barnum, I said that he was known for being a froster as well. But then he was kind of selling people, like, you know, the idea of a show, kind of an entertaining. He was saying, oh, this is someone, like, you know, out of this universe. And like people, it's not playing on people's pain, on people's, you know, health, grief. So I'm not saying that it's right. It's not. It's wrong. But still, I find it a bit more wrong when you're playing on those things. And so I feel that whether he was conscientious or not. I think, like I said, the only way to go was forward with the lie. I think he knew he was lying. But I just kind of lose a bit of respect for the fact that he was taking advantage of people's grief. I don't know. Look, it'd be interesting to know, but the guy isn't here. So.
Yeah, well, as far as we know. But yeah, as well, and just as well as that, I mean, I guess because there was so much money being made, it's hard to kind of see it from this point of view. But you know the way, I mean, you might have people, I don't know what the majority of people believe in nowadays, but you might, I know for me, kind of maybe older relatives that believe that they've had a sign from the other side of a close relative. I mean, I'm not going to turn around to them and say, no, I don't believe in that, you're wrong. Because it's giving them comfort. So sometimes I wonder if there were people that were gaining comfort from these images. Was it such a bad thing?
But yeah, I suppose that's where we'll...
wrap it up.
Yeah.
I mean,
guess,
I'm interested to see what people think you know, about him. I mean, do you guys, like, let us know what you guys think of Mumler. If you think, you know, he was an evil fraudster, or if what he did had some benefits, let us know. I'd be interested.
Yeah, and if you have other cases or any suggestions for us to do maybe on the podcast here, on, you know, next season or next episodes, let us know. And yeah, I guess that, you know, I would like to also thank MPB for, you know, sponsoring this podcast and for helping us in this venture. We really appreciate that. Don't forget that the links are down below. And yeah, I guess that it's all for today. So I usually have my own outro, but this is going to be a first for us. So how do we wrap it up? Just like stay safe, keep shooting. That's what I usually say. Stay safe, keep shooting, keep creating, keep learning.
And keep it weird.
We're out. Peace.